Good day. Today I'm going to lecture on definition of communication and the channel of communication, as well as the elements of the communication process. Right. So I'm going to start by defining what is communication. So communication is defined as a two-way process. It is a two-way process whereby information, which is what we call a message, is sent from one person who is the sender through the channel to the receiver, who in turn gives a feedback. Right? Communication, it is a two-way process. Right? So it is a two-way process in the sense that there is interchange of roles between the sender and the receiver. Right? For example, the sender, right? How are you? How are you? And then the receiver will give a feedback. The receiver will give a feedback. I am good. And how are you? How are you? Right. So, meaning to say, the receiver gives a feedback and automatically becomes the sender. So, the sender becomes the receiver now, who is going to reply, I am fine. Right. I am fine. So, there is interchange of roles between the sender and the receiver. So the receiver becomes the sender here, and then the sender becomes the receiver. So that's the two-way process, because there's interchange of roles between the sender and the receiver, right? So it is a two-way process whereby messaging or the information is sent from one person who is the sender through a channel to another, the receiver, who in turn gives a feedback or who will be reacting by providing a feedback. Right. So when you are writing the definition, when you are defining communication, make sure that you don't forget these elements: the sender, the receiver, the information, the channel, and then the feedback. So the examiner might give questions like, define what is communication, define what is communication, define what is communication, or define communication. Right? Sometimes you'll give 5 marks or 7 marks. You'll give 5 marks or 7 marks. Right? Might be 5 marks or 7. So for you to get 5 marks, you're supposed to make sure that you include these elements: the information, the sender, the receiver, the channel, the feedback. Right? For your definition to be correct. Right? So you should know that the communication process has keywords that you are supposed to include in your definition. Right. So I'm going to move on to the next, whereby we're going to discuss the model, the communication model. So the communication model starts with the sender. The sender, who is the encoder of the message, is going to encode the message, is going to encode information into a message to the receiver, is going to encode the information to the receiver, the sender of the message. Right. So the sender is going to encode, right, is the encoder of the message. So the sender here, right, who is the encoder. The sender is the encoder. is the encoder of the message, is the encoder of the message. It's going to send the message, going to send the message. This is the message that is being sent. The message is going to be sent through a channel. The message is going to be sent through a channel, right? The message is going to be sent through a channel. A channel is a broader way of sending a message. It can be a television, radio, or a telephone to the receiver, to the receiver, to the receiver, right? The message is going to be sent to the receiver, to the receiver. The message is going to be sent to the receiver. Who is the decoder? Who is the decoder? Who is the decoder? Who is the decoder? Right. Once the receiver receives the message, he will send a feedback. He will send a feedback. He will send a feedback. Right. A feedback is sent, which is a response. Feedback is sent. You will send a feedback, right? But during the communication process, there is noise. There is noise, which is a barrier. There are barriers, physical barriers. There is a physical noise that might disturb communication to be effective, right? So there's a sender who will send the message through a channel to the receiver, who then gives a feedback. This is a simple diagram for the communication channel. This is a simple diagram for the communication channel, right? So I'm going to move on to elements of the communication process. I'm going to discuss elements of the communication model, right? The first element that I'm going to discuss is the sender, right? The sender is referred to the communicator, that person who communicates, right? The person who is the addressee, the addressier, the transmitter, the source of the message, the encoder of information. We call that person the sender. The sender. The person who initiates communication activities and formulates the message. The person who initiates, who starts the conversation is the sender. The source of the information, the encoder of the information, the addressier of the information, the communicator. Right, that's the sender. The sender. Right, let's move on to the next element, which is the encoding. Encoding, right? The sender is the one who encodes the message. So what is encoding? What will the sender do when he is encoding? The sender will formulate thoughts into a language or a message using a code which the receiver can understand, right? Encoding. The sender formulates thoughts. The sender has something that he wants to communicate, right, in his mind, right? He has thoughts that he was supposed to pass into message or convert into message so that the other person can receive it, right? Can be able to understand it. So the sender is aware that the receiver does not know Sotho, for example, right? So what does he do? He formulates thoughts into a message using a code which the receiver can understand. A code might be a language. right? Or it might be set of symbols that the receiver can understand. For example, the receiver understands English, right? So what does he do? He might convert his thoughts from his mother language, which is maybe the Sotho, into English, so that the receiver can be able to understand the message. Encoding. It is when the sender formulates thoughts into a message using a code which the receiver can understand. Right. So a code is a language that the receiver can understand. It might be set of symbols that the receiver can understand. Right. So I'm going to move on to the next element, which is the message or information. Information, right? So information which is being conveyed during the communication process. That information that is being sent, the information that is sent, right? That is delivered, that is being transmitted. That's what you call, that is what you call message. A message, information that is sent, that is delivered, that is being conveyed during the communication process. For example, the sender might say, "How are you?" How are you is the information that is being sent, that is being delivered to the receiver, right? So I'm going to move on to the next element of the communication model, which is the receiver. The receiver is the one who responds, so is the respondent, is the addressee, is the destination of the message, or is the encoder of the message, so the decoder of the message, right? So the person to whom the message is directed to, that's what you call the receiver, right? The person who is going to respond to the message, or the person who gives the feedback, right? The person who gives the feedback, right? He gives the feedback. The person who is going to decode, that's the what? The receiver. The person who the message is intended, right? The one who is going to receive the message is the receiver, right? So I'm going to move on to another element, which is decoding. Decoding. Decoding is when the receiver, so the receiver will decode the code, or he will interpret the message using a code, right? It might be a language, it might be pictures, or maybe it might be signs that he can understand, right? So decoding is when the receiver is interpreting the message using a language that he can understood. For example, the sender sent the message using English. He sent the message using English, right? So the receiver, maybe he's aware of he understands Sotho. What he's going to do is going to interpret the message into Sotho so that he can understood it. Right, that's decoding, right? We also have another element, which is what we call a channel, which is a message that is sent from the sender to the receiver, right? The way in which the message is going to be sent, right? The way in which feedback is sent from the sender to the receiver, right? For example, telephone conversation, it's a what? It's a channel, telephone, right? Telephone call. It might be a television. It's also a channel. It might be a radio. These are also channels. The way in which the message is sent to the receiver, we call it a channel, right? That's what you call a channel. The way in which the message is sent from the receiver, from the sender to the receiver, and the way in which the feedback is sent from the receiver to the sender. That's what we call a channel, way of transporting a message. It might be face to face, right? Face-to-face conversation. So it is also what we call a channel, right? We also have feedback, which is the receiver's response or reaction to a message. So the receiver can respond verbally, right, using spoken words, right, verbally using spoken words, or you can respond non-verbal, whereby he might maybe express himself, uh, maybe he can use what gestures, he can use facial expressions, a frown on the face. It is also what a response. It is also, you can also use sign language to respond to the receivers, so to the sender's message. You can respond verbally or non-verbally. You can respond non-verbally or verbally using spoken words. How are you? And then I'm fine, right? And then non-verbally, you can just give a thumb gesture to show that he's fine, an okay gesture, right? To show that he's fine without using spoken words. Right. Lastly, we have noise. Noise, right? Noise, noise, right? Noise, it is a communication barrier or an interference which prevents communication to be effective. Anything that disturbs communication, any interference, any barrier that causes communication to break down, that's what you call noise. For example, noise of a hooting car, it may be a ringing phone, it may be too hot temperatures or a poor eyesight. It's also noise, it has acted as a barrier. Poor eyesight might act as a barrier or interference which prevent communication to be effective, or a noise of a hooting car, which is what we call a physical noise. It also acts as a barrier that causes or that prevent communication to be effective, right? So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to end here. Don't forget to subscribe so that you can receive notification each time I post. Have a good day.